Anyone recognize this footprint? I hope everybody does. You know, getting a person on the moon was a pretty difficult challenge. We tend to remember the landing and not the 7, 8, 9 years that it took to get there. But we did it. We did it one step at a time. My name is Jeff. I've been a developer since the early 90s. In about 2010, 2012, started to develop a side interest in the learning sciences. How do we actually learn anything? I hated school, in case you can't tell, but and since then I've sort of straddled this line between academia and industry. So I'm an entrepreneur, I have my own little company. I also teach part-time at the University of Chicago in the computer science department, which is funny because I don't have a computer science degree. Please don't tell them. But ever since I started to get into the learning sciences, I got involved with working with different kinds of boot camps, different college graduates who were coming out of college. And I've just been sort of connected to the early career developer for a long time. So the problem that I want to address today kind of looks like this. A bunch of us are living in Starterville right now, and we want to move to Jobtown. And there's this infinite chasm apparently between the two. Now, you may not be going through this right now, but at some point you probably did. If you think back, all you senior devs out there, what was it like when you were first getting started? How did you get your break? How did you get across that chasm? Now, when I started, I was very lucky. It was mid-90s, and if you could breathe, you could be hired. And I met that criteria, and I was good to go. The economic situation globally is not the same as it was, just pre-pandemic, and so it's become very difficult for smart, hardworking folks to just get a break. So, anybody relate to this at all? Hopefully, a little bit. So that's what I want to address today, and I'm mostly going to be talking to those of you who have recently come out of boot camps or a college, but I also have hopefully an uncomfortable thing to mention along the way to those of you who employ people. So just real quick, here's my top 5 tips if you're trying to cross the chasm here. The first step is to find what I call a learning path using, in the learning sciences, we call it the rule of adjacency. Whenever you start to learn something new, your brain has to restructure it itself a little tiny bit. And I don't exactly know how that works, but from the researchers I've talked to, that's really what's happening, is you're changing your brain in a physical way. And so the closer that new information is to what you already know, the less of a change your brain has to make to figure it out. So if you're learning Ruby for the first time and you're learning how to define a method, once you get that down, the next thing to probably learn would be, okay, I understand there can be an input parameter. What else can you do in that input parameter line, right? And that's when you might start learning about, you could do like variable arguments, keyword arguments, things like that. If you went, I just learned how to define a method in Ruby, I'm now going to figure out how to develop and deploy this thing to a Linux box I've never heard of. That's probably too big a leap. You want to find like the stone path. What's the next step in my progression as a developer? What do I know now? What have I been curious about? What have I become aware about that at that one next level ring out? So one of the things I just learned from Andre's talk is, okay, I need to first understand what an LLM is. Then maybe I'll start to understand all the whole rest of it. I can't just do everything at once. And the problem is when we're coming out of a boot camp or college, is we see these job requirements that list a million things, right? There's a whole acronym soup there. And it's frustrating. You want to learn everything, but I'm just saying you can't. The most effective, fastest path is actually to start with what you know now, be curious about the next step and learn that, and just keep going that way. Tip number 2, be a T person. No, not this T person. Be a different kind of T person. So when an early career developer generally has a shallow but wide area of knowledge, right? So most bootcamp grads I've talked to, they know how to use the terminal a little bit. They've learned some JavaScript. They can kind of get around in Rails. They know some Ruby, although really not much of the language because most of the bootcamps focus just on the Rails portion. They know a little bit about how to connect to a database and maybe some SQL. They maybe hopefully have done some testing. So what's great is they've gotten exposure to a lot of different areas of things, but it's kind of shallow. And when you're desperate to cross that chasm and you don't know what the secret thing you need to know is to get that next job, you try to learn everything. So given any of these top headers, you could go down vertically and try to get deeper using an adjacency step. But you're still trying to cover the whole board and you don't even know where to start. And then it feels overwhelming and you just start to why did I even do this? I'm applying to jobs, I'm not getting much responses. I go to 4 interviews and then they ghost me. What is going on? And it can be a very frustrating thing to go through. So I recommend becoming what I call a T person, which is you pick one area of specialty at a time. And it kind of almost doesn't matter which one you pick. Pick the one that's more fun for you. So in this random case, I picked, okay, what if the Ruby language was really what got you excited? Okay, what's the next step? Maybe learn how to build a gem. Maybe then, once you've conquered that, learn some metaprogramming. Then maybe get really advanced performance and getting to tuning of Ruby applications. And it might seem okay, but during that time, maybe someone was going to hire me for React. Well, we don't know if that's true. Meanwhile, you are making a name for yourself that if somebody has a Ruby issue, you are the person to go to. And that's a very valuable thing. There are lots of people trying to apply for jobs who get a couple levels deep in everything, but they're not really known for anything specific. And I think that's one of the things that can get your resume more to the top, also gets you word of mouth. If you're someone who's really great at running background jobs with Sidekick or now SolidQ, if you're the first on that, then when someone needs help, they're going to think of you. If you just say, well, I can do everything, they're actually not going to think of you when they have that problem. You know what I mean? They're going to think of someone who already has that specialty. So pick something that you enjoy, go down as far as you can, and when you get to a stopping point, okay, switch to another T. But I think this is a more effective approach actually to getting ahead in the industry than trying to be a jack of all trades with everything. By the way, I forgot to mention at the bottom right, if you want to see the slides later, there's a bit.ly link. Also in Slack, I'll be posting it into our specific channel. All right, number 3, no, not use the force. Read the source. This is, I think, one of the most underrated skills. The developers that I've admired as I've learned Ruby from scratch have all been great at reading other people's code. And it can be an intimidating thing. You're looking at code that is in a different style. You may not know what you're even looking at, but you need to get immersed in it in order to really understand it. The way it was put to me was, think of your favorite author. Okay, now, hopefully you have a favorite author, so get that in mind. Now think about how many books in their lifetime that they read. And how many books in their lifetime did they write? Okay. So reading is our way of learning the language. And if you have a friend to talk about it with, even better. That'll multiply the experience. So when I started to get into Ruby around 2007, the only source code I really had to look at was the Rails source. And so that's how I started to learn Ruby, was actually by, oh, this is how you write an each. And this is how I should do my indentation. And what is this other weird method? Let me go look that up. It was just a wonderful way to start to learn what I did not know, to become aware of what I was not even aware of before. I'm sure all of you have done a Rails new. Have you ever looked at your gem file? Okay, like, it's all open source, people. You can go read. There's no secrets here. There's no magic. You can go read the source. And some of it is too hard to read. I skip it. Go look for something that's easy to find. Look at the sidekick code. Go look at any gem that's your favorite and start to see how some of it works. That's an underrated magic tool for getting ahead. Tip number 4, it's kind of like a T person, but turns differently for folks who maybe want to start their own company or just be a freelancer, is to specialize by domain. So rather than specializing by technology stack, think about, well, you know what, I'm good at building landing pages for medical offices. Great thing about that is that once you do one, they happen to know other medical offices. And they might be able to refer you. I've had many friends who have actually accidentally fallen into getting known for a particular industry and have done very well just by specializing in that particular field. Each domain has its own jargon, its own way of working, and when you get immersed into that, you become sort of qualified to work in that area. I build software, currently I build software for clinical researchers in the behavioral sciences at academic institutions. And I tell them that very specific niche. And they're like, wow, you know how to build software for behavioral sciences? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Now the truth is, it's just Rails, people. There's nothing different about this at all. But I say that I'm in this niche, and instantly you get credibility. And of course, I've had to learn about this particular domain along the way. That's my homework. But that's been a very successful approach for me. Tip number 5, join a local user group. I know this has been hard to do since the pandemic, but some of them are online. I think we have a pretty great one here in Boulder. Yes. I'm from Chicago, and so this has been wonderful for me to see this. Chicago has long had a great history of local user groups, and it's been the best way for me to connect with other developers. And the first time I went, I didn't get a job through that networking. But after a year or two, suddenly things were coming my way because I was getting to be known by other people. I learned a lot by being around other people. It's a chance to share and to practice speaking in front of a group. It's a chance to work with people who don't know as much as you do and to help them out, to be next to people who know more than you do and to be helped by them. It's what's just a fundamental part of being part of the Ruby community, I think. If you don't have a local user group, start one. Find 2 friends, get together once a month, and you never know how that can grow. Okay, a little bonus tip. This might not be possible for everybody, I get it. You've already spent a lot of money at Bootcamp or college, but consider some type of what I call grad school. I've started contributing to a newsletter for beginners called Beginner Focused. There are workshops all the time that are online. But one of the best things I've done is when the pandemic started and I couldn't get together with my usual group of friends for lunch once a week, we started to just Zoom anyway and eat lunch over Zoom. And there are 5 of us. And what we decided to do was that we would meet twice a month. And we would take turns presenting on what we've learned in the past month, small or large. So, hey, we've heard about this new thing in Rails. Has anybody done? No, okay, I'll try to learn about that and do a presentation. Like, find your own cohort that you can use to continue learning. It's really an invaluable tool. Okay, now this is the part where I usually get fruit thrown at me by certain parts of the audience. I'm not going to do 5 tips. I'm just going to do one, just for the sake of time here. I'm happy to talk about my other 14 tips later. This is the most common, I wouldn't say mistake, but I guess the most common thing that I see that's just a bit unfortunate in our industry right now. Here's 2 graphs. There's a person on the left who started at some level and over time continued to grow. This is sort of their trajectory on their career. So maybe they started as a software developer. They're now maybe mid-level or almost senior developer. And they spent some time building that up. Meanwhile, you have somebody who's really started from almost nothing. They went to a boot camp because they were tired of the kind of job they had. They wanted to switch careers. Maybe they came out of college, realized that college didn't really completely prepare them for the current economic climate. So they want to augment that, and so they went to they're trying to learn more, and so they've only been in the industry now a shorter amount of time. But who would you rather hire if you had to hire somebody? And I think right now what's happening is the person on the left gets hired because most companies are, cash is tight, and we're looking for that someone who can hit the ground running. Someone who knows a lot, who's going to integrate with the team really well. And it's a risk to hire somebody, right? You might be paying that person for, a year and then find out what if they don't work out. So you're trying to go with the better risk. But unfortunately, I don't think that's always the better risk, the better investment. If you look at the person on the right, can you extrapolate where they're going to go? Right? They're going to end up actually, their learning curve, their ability to learn has been demonstrated, and if they keep on that path, they're going to become one of your best performing employees. So the thing to evaluate when you're hiring isn't just where are they currently at, it's what is their learning trajectory. Now, to figure that out requires a very different approach to interviewing than we typically do. I'm just really tired of these whiteboard games where someone says, "Can you please sort this list?" And if that happens to you, just say no. If that's the best question you have, I don't want to work here. This is not, and I know that's hard to say if you're looking for work, but it's really true. You're going to hate that job, I promise you, 6 months, 12 months down the line. Because what the question implies by doing that is, what can you right now, out of your head, prove to us that you know this random piece of data? That's not really a good indicator of who's going to do well in this industry, right? We all know that we don't know what we're doing. Can we just please admit that? I Google 3, 4, 5 times a day, every hour, in fact. So there's the key to our profession. The reason people hire us is because we've learned how to learn. Yeah, like we know how to keep up with stuff. When Rails 8 comes out, like, oh my God, what the heck is this? You're like, oh, okay, I think I can dig into this and let me see if I can understand this so I can apply it. That is the skill that we should be looking for when we're hiring new people. There's a swath of early career developers, junior developers, apprentices, whatever you want to say, that have that ability, that are going to pay dividends for you. Honestly, they're going to take less money than that mid-level developer is. They're going to be more loyal to you because they need that job for a certain amount of time. There's just a lot of reasons why it makes more sense to hire that person on the right and take a risk in the short term than the person on the left. All right, I'm just going to close with, this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. This is Neil Armstrong coming down the ladder, And I was thinking, wait a minute, if that's Neil Armstrong, who's taking the picture? There are Martians on the moon. Who's that? Okay, no, so that's Buzz Aldrin. Neil had already come down, and he's the one with the camera there. But he's about to take that little step, right? He came from pretty far away. A lot of people are hoping to just take that little step to land on their moon, like to get their job. Neil Armstrong said, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So here's the thing about hiring early career developers. The entire community benefits. When he landed on the moon, what he meant was, this isn't just his personal accomplishment. This is going to benefit everybody. All the science it took to get there is going to benefit everybody. So sure, it's one person who gets to step on their moon to get that new job, but it's the community that grows as a result of that. The community reaps the benefits from all of that developer's future contributions. Think of all the open source that we now benefit from, that we stand on top of. Somebody had to hire them at some point and give them a chance. And over time, they contributed back to the community. That's how this works. So look, we may work remotely these days, but none of us works alone. We need our community to be healthy and active. We need new people coming into the community. If we just close the doors, said, okay, everybody who's in is in, right? Well, eventually we're going to go find something else to do, or we're going to die, one or the other. And then what happens to the Ruby? What happens to Ruby in the community? Do we let JavaScript win? No. We need to keep growing as a community, to learn together, to build together, to achieve together. Thank you very much. Great. For sure. So the question is, if we're going to think about hiring based on projection, as a hiring manager, how do we actually do that? Yeah, that's a good question. That's great. No, it's a great question. There's a few cliche ways to start. Let me start with those, and then I'll get into some rules. One is to actually dig into where did this person start and where are they now? So you just start with simple things and start to tabulate this. Oh, you went to a boot camp. What year was that? What have you done since then? Do they have an intrinsic drive to learn? I think this is one of the most common things among successful developers, is that we're just naturally curious. We love this stuff, right? And so even if someone is currently unemployed, have they continued to learn? What have they done since boot camp? What have they done since college? Another, I think, underrated or maybe less thought of approach is to also look at, have they volunteered anywhere? This was mentioned to me, well, I don't want to put them on the spot, but by a very large company that they're looking for open source contributions as a one way to get your resume to the top of the stack. But they said, even if you don't have that, did they volunteer anywhere? Do they show any sense of like trying to be part of a community or giving part of themselves? So in terms of projection, yeah, all you can do is kind of take the data that they've shown you so far. What have I done so far? Where did I start from? And where are they now? And that hopefully will give you some arrow. I think that the problem is when we ask, what do you know now? And I don't really care what you know now. I mean, to some extent I do, of course. You need at least to hit the minimums for what you need. But if they've shown that they went to, they were a lawyer, they went to Turing, and 2 months out, they can already get themselves well around a Rails app. That's an amazing, trajectory. And that says a lot about where they're probably going to go. All right, let me see if I can repeat that. So I'll do the second part first. How, as a job seeker, do you articulate and demonstrate your growth, even though you may not be at the senior level yet? How do you at least help hiring managers who are not accustomed to this philosophy, understand where you're coming from. Is that a good repeat of that second part? So I think you have to do something which doesn't come naturally to us as developers, which is to market yourself. Like this is hard for me. I always had a hard time explaining in interviews, what I really did in my previous job. It's hard. I don't know why. But that's really important to say. However you decide to calculate your trajectory, and I understand that was the first part of your question, I think, which is, how do I even know what my trajectory is? I think part of it is to get back into what they call the beginner's mind, right? Like all of you, I assume now are developing, you've learned some coding at least. Can you remember when you did not know how to code? It's actually really hard to remember that, right? You know what I mean? It's hard to remember when you didn't know what a variable was. But that's part of the beginner's mind thing. If you can get back to somehow magically remember what that felt like when you were first learning, like that lines of code executed in sequence. If you can get back to that feeling, then I think you've got a chance at being able to then self-reflect and say, here's where I started. Look at what I can do now. And one of the problems in our industry is that we're always dissatisfied with where we are. We never feel satisfied with what we've learned. We take for granted what we've learned, like, but I don't know that. Like, but you just learned like 10 things in 3 months. That's pretty good. So I don't have like a crystal ball for like how to do that. But I think if you can start to articulate to yourself, what have I learned? Maybe you kept a journal, or maybe something like that would be helpful. Can you enumerate the steps that you took to get where you are? Even if it doesn't seem much to you, it's actually more than you think. And that can then be the basis for turning around and giving your own personal story. Hey, I was doing a construction job and I loved it, but I want to do something different. Here's what I've learned in just 18 months. Is that helpful at all? Yeah, great. Yeah, down here. What are other ways to help out at a meetup?
Yep, other than speaking or saying.
This is going to sound funny, but what I would do is I would buy the pizza. No, seriously, I would buy the pizza. I would make sure the room was unlocked when there would be a company who would be nice enough to sponsor the meetups, and so. But it was always after hours down in the loop, and so we had to make sure the room was open, make sure security knew we were going to be there. Like someone to take care of the details that are unseen, so that the rest of the group could benefit. And it's sometimes feels like no one notices, but a few people will, and they'll always appreciate it. And I think then you start to learn the personalities in that group, and you might decide, you know what, I'm gonna back out from this group a little bit, and maybe find another one. That's okay too. Sorry. Not every group is perfect, but I think just finding how can you be helpful. That's one of the ways in which people started to know me. They started to see I was a reliable person, and things like that. So you just start small, I think. Yeah, great question. So as a senior developer, how can we help convince the rest of us in our company to hire more junior developers when it seems like no one's listening to that advice anymore? I think there's a strong case to be made about institutional knowledge. It kind of depends on the size of your company, but if you're, like, how big is your company? More than 100 people? Okay, well, it's going to be a harder argument. But actually, not so much. I think even in a given team, right? Even if you're in a large company, companies break down into teams, and there's knowledge that is institutionalized within that team. I think someone used bus factor the other day, which I now call the lottery factor, just to be a little nicer. Like, how many developers would it take to win the lottery before I lose all my developers? Rather than being hit by a bus, which I've always been now very afraid of doing. So, but even within a team, if you don't hire new people coming in, how you might document how things work. No team I've ever worked on documents very well. And so it really lives in the heads of everybody who's on that team. And then, they might get a better offer. Eventually, that team will die. I mean, it's just the nature of things. So I think one way to talk about it is what junior developers bring to the table is not just apparent lower productivity, which I think is what they're worried about. They're worried about is that you get a fresh set of eyes on the problem. There are lots of smart people who have worked in other industries that are now developers, that have experience that are not just, just straight out of college. And so I think maybe one approach would be, okay, let's find someone who's doing can we at least find someone who's doing a mid-career change? They've got business experience. They've proven that they know how to think straight. We know that they're a reliable person. They are now trying to help us. That's my only real thought there is that we need to find value, try to make the argument of value that isn't just how many lines of code do you write. It's what that person as a personality is going to bring to the table. And I think you get that more from junior developers. Actually, the best developers I've worked with were not computer science majors. Again, I hope this video doesn't go out to you, Chicago. But we're not computer science majors. They were art majors. They were English majors. They were history majors because they already had a perspective of life that they can then express through code and bring to bear upon the problem that you're hiring them for. And they're not just, zoned in on that computer science. So that's the best I can think of. Yeah. All right. Great. Anybody else? Thank you so much.